Today, on Bio Bytes, we journey into the life of Robert Oppenheimer, the man who would forever alter the course of history through his work on the atomic bomb. To understand Oppenheimer's remarkable life, we begin in a different time, in a different world, New York City, in the early 20th century. Robert Oppenheimer, known to many as J. Robert Oppenheimer, was born on April 22, 1904, into a family that embodied ambition, intellect, and cultural refinement. His full name at birth was Julius Robert Oppenheimer. Although he would go by Robert or simply Oppie to his friends, his heritage was reflected in that first name, a nod to his father, Julius, who came to America with little more than the clothes on his back and a fierce determination to succeed. The Oppenheimer family's story began across the Atlantic, in a Europe that was rapidly changing. Robert's father, Julius, was born in 1871 in the Hesse-Nassau region of what would soon become the German Empire. At the time of Julius's birth, Europe was experiencing a period of national consolidation and rising political tension. For Jewish families like the Oppenheimers, life in Europe was marked by an undercurrent of unease. The rise of anti-Semitic policies, particularly in Prussia and the surrounding German states, led many to seek a life elsewhere. By the late 1880s, anti-Semitism had reached levels that made it increasingly difficult for Jews to pursue stable lives in much of Central and Western Europe. Julius Oppenheimer made the life-altering decision to leave Germany in 1888. At only 17, he arrived in the United States with almost nothing to his name, but he carried with him the tenacity and work ethic that would soon change his fate. America, at the time, was a place of enormous possibility, where the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Cities like New York were growing rapidly, with immigrants from every corner of the world contributing to the cultural mosaic of the United States. Julius's rise in America was nothing short of remarkable. Starting as a clerk in the garment industry, he worked tirelessly, quickly learning English and adapting to the fast-paced life of New York City. Within a few short years, he had moved up in the ranks, eventually becoming a leading textile executive. His success allowed him to provide a life of considerable privilege for his family, a far cry from the life he had known in Germany. By the time his first son Robert was born in 1904, Julius was a respected figure in New York business circles, known for his success, intelligence, and integrity. Robert's mother, Ella Friedman, was born in New York in 1870, into a family of German Jewish immigrants who had settled in America a generation earlier. Ella was a cultured woman, an artist by profession, and a painter by passion. Through her, Robert was introduced to the worlds of art, philosophy, and literature. The walls of their family home were decorated with original works by Van Gogh and Picasso, a testament to both the family's wealth and their appreciation of the arts. This environment fostered in young Robert a profound respect for creativity, beauty, and intellectual curiosity. The Oppenheimer household was a place of both privilege and intellectual stimulation. The family's home on West 88th Street in Manhattan overlooked Central Park, a luxurious setting that placed them among the city's elite. Growing up, Robert was surrounded by art, books, and conversation, where ideas about science, philosophy, and ethics were freely discussed. This unique upbringing nurtured his early interest in the nature of existence, a theme that would later permeate both his scientific pursuits and his philosophical outlook on life. Robert was not the only child in the Oppenheimer family. In 1912, when Robert was 8 years old, his younger brother Frank was born. The two would share a close bond, with Frank later following in Robert's footsteps to become a physicist in his own right. Yet, from early on, Robert stood out for his precocious intellect and intense curiosity. He seemed almost destined for a life of thought and inquiry, qualities that were apparent even in his early childhood. Robert's upbringing in New York City, a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and opportunities, left a profound mark on his identity. The city, with its towering buildings, bustling streets, and cosmopolitan spirit, was a place where dreams could be realized, a place that echoed with possibility. For Robert, the vibrant, ever-evolving landscape of New York instilled a sense of curiosity about the world, one that would drive him to seek knowledge and understanding in everything he encountered. As Robert grew older, He began to develop interests that set him apart from other children his age. By the time he was 5, he had already shown a fascination with the natural world, particularly with rocks and minerals. This early interest was encouraged by his grandfather, who had a small collection of minerals that Robert found endlessly fascinating. He would later join the Mineralogical Club of New York City at the age of 11, an unusual achievement for a child and one that foreshadowed his future in the sciences. In addition to his love of minerals, Robert displayed an early talent for academics. His parents enrolled him in the Ethical Culture School, a progressive institution founded on the principles of ethical and humanistic education. At Ethical Culture, Robert was exposed to a curriculum that emphasized not just academic achievement, but also moral and social responsibility. The school's founder, Felix Adler, believed in the importance of instilling ethical values in young minds, a philosophy that would shape Robert's character and worldview. The Ethical Culture School provided a rigorous education that encouraged Robert's intellectual growth. Here he was introduced to subjects that ranged from mathematics and science to philosophy and ethics. It was an environment where curiosity was celebrated, and Robert thrived. His teachers noted his extraordinary intellect and his ability to grasp complex concepts with ease. But Robert was not content to simply excel in the classroom. He was driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, one that would lead him to explore subjects far beyond the standard curriculum. As Robert continued his education, he moved on to the Alcuin Preparatory School, another esteemed institution that furthered his academic development. By this time, his interests had expanded beyond mineralogy to include chemistry and eventually physics. His intellectual pursuits were matched by his academic achievements. He completed his studies at Alcuin in a year and a half less than the standard time, fast-tracked through grades due to his exceptional abilities. Robert's early life was one of privilege, intellect, and curiosity. Surrounded by art, literature, and scientific inquiry, he was shaped by an environment that encouraged exploration and learning. The intellectual foundation laid during these formative years would serve him well in the years to come, as he embarked on a journey that would take him from the prestigious halls of Harvard University to the cutting-edge research labs of Europe, and eventually to the deserts of New Mexico, where he would lead one of the most consequential scientific projects in history. Robert's academic journey truly began to take shape during his years at the Ethical Culture School. This institution, founded on the principles of ethical and progressive education, provided a learning environment that was as rigorous as it was enlightening. Here, Robert encountered ideas that would spark his imagination and deepen his understanding of the world around him. He studied a wide array of subjects, but it was his fascination with science that would ultimately guide his path. Mineralogy had been his first love, a field he explored with an almost obsessive curiosity. Rocks and minerals became more than just objects of study. They were clues to understanding the earth itself. At the Ethical Culture School, Robert's teachers quickly recognized his exceptional talents. He wasn't just a gifted student. He was a young scholar with a unique perspective and a relentless desire to learn. The school's founder, Felix Adler, believed that education should develop both the mind and the moral character. This philosophy resonated deeply with Robert, who embraced the idea that knowledge came with responsibility, a belief that would later influence his views on science and its impact on humanity. By the time Robert reached his teenage years, his interests had expanded. Chemistry became a new passion, one that allowed him to delve into the very building blocks of matter. Chemistry, unlike mineralogy, required a more abstract understanding of the physical world, and Robert was captivated by the challenge. His intellectual curiosity was matched only by his work ethic. He would often spend long hours studying, reading voraciously, and questioning everything he encountered. This dedication was not only a testament to his character, but also a glimpse into the extraordinary mind that would soon take him to the highest echelons of scientific achievement. Robert's progression through his education was rapid. At the Alcuin Preparatory School, he excelled at an astonishing rate, completing his studies in less than the standard time. His peers and teachers alike were struck by his ability to grasp complex subjects with ease. But Robert's brilliance was not confined to the sciences. He was equally captivated by literature, philosophy, and the classics. He developed a deep appreciation for works by Greek and Roman philosophers, and he read widely in both ancient and contemporary literature. This eclectic intellectual foundation would later enable him to bridge diverse fields of knowledge in ways that few others could. By the time he graduated from Alcuin, Robert was ready for the next stage of his academic journey. In 1922, he enrolled at Harvard University, one of America's most prestigious institutions. Here he intended to study chemistry, but Harvard's rigorous and interdisciplinary approach to education soon broadened his horizons even further. At Harvard, Robert was exposed to a curriculum that emphasized not only academic excellence, but also intellectual diversity. He took courses in history, philosophy, and literature, immersing himself in subjects that fed his insatiable curiosity. It was during this time that Robert began to see connections between the physical sciences and the philosophical questions that had long intrigued him. Harvard was also where Robert encountered Percy Bridgman, a renowned experimental physicist whose teachings would leave a lasting impression on him. Bridgman was known for his rigorous approach to science, emphasizing the importance of empirical evidence and experimentation. Under Bridgman's guidance, Robert began to see the world of physics not just as a field of study, but as a lens through which he could explore the fundamental truths of existence. Bridgman's influence, combined with Harvard's diverse curriculum, allowed Robert to cultivate a unique perspective, one that blended scientific inquiry with philosophical reflection. Robert's time at Harvard was marked by intense academic achievement. His voracious reading habits and dedication to learning were legendary. He spent countless hours in the library, reading everything from scientific journals to classical literature. He even attended more classes than were necessary for his degree, driven not by a desire for accolades, but by a genuine love of knowledge. This dedication paid off in 1925, when he graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts degree, a distinction that usually took 4 years to achieve, but which Robert completed in just 3. Even before his graduation, Robert's academic reputation had begun to spread. His professors recognized his extraordinary intellect and his potential for groundbreaking work in the sciences. By the time he left Harvard, he had already secured a place at Cambridge University in England, one of the world's leading centers for the study of physics. It was a fitting next step for a young man whose journey had only just begun. After graduating from Harvard in 1925, Robert Oppenheimer's academic journey led him across the Atlantic to the University of Cambridge in England, an institution with a legendary history in the sciences. Cambridge had been the home of scientific giants like Isaac Newton, whose work in the 17th century had laid the foundations of modern physics. By the early 20th century, Cambridge had become a central hub for scientific research, particularly in physics. It was here that Oppenheimer hoped to advance his studies in a field that was on the brink of revolutionary change. At Cambridge, Robert began his studies under the guidance of some of the most renowned physicists of the time. Among them was Lord Ernest Rutherford, a towering figure in nuclear physics, whose groundbreaking work on radioactivity and atomic structure had earned him a Nobel Prize in chemistry in 1908. Rutherford was known for his sharp intellect and equally sharp personality, a man who demanded excellence and precision from his students. This new academic environment would prove both challenging and transformative for Robert. Yet Robert's time at Cambridge was far from easy. Unlike his intellectually supportive years at Harvard, where he had thrived among like-minded mentors and peers, Cambridge presented a much more competitive and, at times, isolating environment. Physically, Robert was a slight, frail young man, a stark contrast to many of his more robust and athletic peers. He also struggled socially, finding it difficult to connect with others in a foreign country that was culturally reserved compared to the bustling intellectual freedom of America. The physical demands of laboratory work, combined with the intense academic pressures, began to take a toll on his health and well-being. One of the most difficult relationships Robert faced at Cambridge was with his tutor, Patrick Blackett, a physicist who would later win a Nobel Prize in physics. Blackett and Robert clashed frequently, both in personality and academic approach. Their relationship reached a breaking point in a notorious incident in which Robert allegedly left a chemically laced apple on Blackett's desk. This act, whether intended as a prank or out of frustration, reflected the strain Robert was under, and his occasionally volatile temperament. Although no harm came to Blackett, this incident underscored the emotional and psychological challenges that Robert faced during his time at Cambridge. For a period, he was even at risk of being suspended from the university. Despite these challenges, Robert's talent did not go unnoticed. His reputation as a promising young physicist began to spread, and he soon received an invitation from Max Born, a distinguished German physicist, to join him at the University of Göttingen. Born was a towering figure in theoretical physics, known for his pioneering work in quantum mechanics, a field that was beginning to transform our understanding of the universe. For Robert, this invitation represented an opportunity to leave the difficulties of Cambridge behind and immerse himself in an intellectual environment that was more suited to his strengths and interests. In 1926, Robert arrived in Göttingen, Germany, eager to begin a new chapter in his academic career. Göttingen was, at that time, one of Europe's most esteemed centers for theoretical physics. It attracted some of the brightest minds of the era, creating an environment of intense intellectual exchange. Here, Robert joined a community that included names like Werner Heisenberg, Enrico Fermi, and Edward Teller, individuals who would later become pioneers in their own right. This new circle of colleagues would not only challenge Robert intellectually, but also shape his views on science and its role in society. Max Born's mentorship proved invaluable for Robert. Unlike the competitive and often harsh environment he had experienced at Cambridge, Göttingen offered a more collaborative atmosphere. Born recognized Robert's unique talents and encouraged him to pursue questions that lay at the intersection of chemistry and physics, a combination that Robert had already explored during his time at Harvard. Under Born's guidance, Robert developed a deeper understanding of quantum mechanics, a field that was rapidly evolving due to the contributions of physicists like Niels Bohr and Paul Dirac. Quantum mechanics was a revolutionary framework that sought to explain the behavior of particles on the atomic and subatomic level, challenging classical physics in ways that were both exciting and perplexing. It was during his time at Göttingen that Robert collaborated with Born on a research paper that would become one of his most significant early contributions to science. Together, they worked on the quantum theory of molecules, a paper that introduced what would later be known as the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. This theory dealt with the behavior of molecules at the quantum level, specifically focusing on the interactions between nuclei and electrons within a molecule. The approximation proposed that because atomic nuclei are much heavier than electrons, their positions remain relatively fixed, allowing scientists to separate nuclear and electronic motion when studying molecular dynamics. The Born-Oppenheimer approximation was a groundbreaking concept. It provided a simplified model for understanding molecular behavior, making it possible to analyze chemical reactions and molecular structures with greater accuracy. This theory bridged the gap between quantum physics and chemistry, demonstrating how Robert's early interest in chemistry continued to inform his work in physics. The success of this approximation not only solidified Robert's reputation as a rising star in theoretical physics, but also laid the foundation for future advancements in molecular science. Robert's achievements in Göttingen earned him respect and admiration among his peers, but his time in Germany was not without its personal challenges. He was, in many ways, a man caught between two worlds, a young American of Jewish heritage in a Europe that was increasingly hostile to Jews. Anti-Semitic sentiments were rising in Germany, fueled by economic turmoil and political unrest. Robert's status as a foreigner and as a Jew made him feel like an outsider, even among his colleagues. Although he did not face direct discrimination within the academic community, the broader social climate left him with a sense of unease, a feeling that would grow more pronounced in the years to come. Despite these challenges, Robert's time in Göttingen was a period of intellectual and personal growth. He earned his PhD in physics in 1927, less than a year after his arrival. His doctoral defense was a remarkable event. James Franck, a Nobel laureate and one of Robert's examiners, reportedly remarked afterward that he was relieved when the examination ended, as Robert had defended his work so effectively that it seemed he was ready to question Franck himself. This early success reflected both Robert's brilliance and the thorough preparation he had received under the guidance of mentors like Max Born. With his PhD in hand and his reputation growing, Robert was now a recognized figure in the field of theoretical physics. His work with Born had placed him at the forefront of quantum mechanics, a field that was reshaping science and redefining humanity's understanding of the universe. But as he prepared to return to America, Robert faced a world that was rapidly changing. The political tensions in Europe were beginning to simmer, and the seeds of the ideological conflicts that would define the 20th century were being sown. For Robert, the journey was far from over. He was about to return to a United States that was also changing, an America on the brink of the Great Depression and eventually of a global war that would bring him back to the forefront of science and history. After his successful years in Europe, Robert Oppenheimer returned to the United States in 1929, a rising star in the field of physics. His early accomplishments and European training had set him apart, and he was welcomed with numerous job offers from top universities. After careful consideration, Robert accepted dual appointments at two institutions that would come to define his academic career: the University of California, Berkeley, and the California Institute of Technology, or Caltech. At Berkeley, he would play a pivotal role in building one of America's leading centers for theoretical physics, while his work at Caltech allowed him to stay connected to some of the nation's most forward-thinking scientific minds. Robert's decision to divide his time between Berkeley and Caltech was unconventional, but it reflected his ambition and his drive to contribute to science on multiple fronts. Berkeley, with its dynamic and rapidly growing physics department, provided Robert with the freedom to develop his own research program and mentor students who shared his passion for theoretical physics. Caltech, on the other hand, connected him to a network of scientists and engineers who were pushing the boundaries of experimental physics. This dual arrangement allowed Robert to work in both academic and practical settings, fostering an intellectual environment that would produce groundbreaking research throughout the 1930s. At Berkeley, Robert quickly established himself as a leader in theoretical physics. His teaching style was as unorthodox as it was inspiring. He was known for his intense focus, his rapid-fire explanations, and his ability to engage students in complex problems. He often conducted lectures with chalk in one hand and a cigarette in the other, his mind seemingly racing as he conveyed concepts that left his students both awed and challenged. Many of his students later recalled that Robert's classes were transformative experiences that changed the way they understood science. Under his mentorship, Berkeley became a hub of theoretical physics, attracting some of the most talented young physicists of the era. Robert's influence extended beyond the classroom. At Berkeley, he founded what would later be known as the School of Theoretical Physics, a group that brought together graduate students and research fellows to work on cutting-edge problems in physics. Robert's leadership style was both demanding and supportive. He challenged his students to think independently, encouraging them to tackle the most difficult questions in the field. Daily discussions and debates became a hallmark of the group's activities, and Robert was at the center of it all, fostering an environment of rigorous inquiry and intellectual growth. This period was marked by several scientific achievements that established Berkeley as a leading center for theoretical physics. In 1930, Robert published a paper that effectively predicted the existence of the positron, a particle that would later be confirmed experimentally by Carl David Anderson, a student of Robert's at Caltech. This discovery was a milestone in the study of particle physics, demonstrating the predictive power of theoretical models and the interplay between theory and experiment. Robert's work on the electron-positron theory, along with his collaboration with Wendell Furry, further solidified his reputation as one of the most innovative minds in physics. Perhaps Robert's most significant work during this period was his collaboration with one of his first doctoral students, Melba Phillips. Together, they developed what became known as the Oppenheimer-Phillips process, a type of nuclear reaction that would have far-reaching implications for the study of atomic and nuclear physics. This process demonstrated that certain elements could become radioactive when bombarded with deuterons, leading to a deeper understanding of nuclear reactions. The Oppenheimer-Phillips process was a groundbreaking achievement, one that contributed to the growing body of knowledge that would later underpin the development of nuclear energy and, ultimately, the atomic bomb. As the 1930s unfolded, Robert Oppenheimer's life took on new layers of complexity, influenced by the shifting political landscape in both America and Europe. Although Robert had previously shown little interest in political matters, the rise of fascism in Europe and the increasing persecution of Jewish communities profoundly impacted him. Oppenheimer, an American Jew of German descent, felt the weight of these global events, and the injustices he witnessed sparked a political awakening that would alter his worldview. For the first time, Oppenheimer began to consider the role that scientists could, and perhaps should, play in the broader societal and political discourse. The 1930s were a time of intense turmoil in Europe. In Germany, the Nazi Party, under Adolf Hitler's leadership, had come to power in 1933, instituting a regime of brutal anti-Semitism that targeted Jewish families, intellectuals, and academics. This oppressive atmosphere created a wave of Jewish emigration from Germany and other parts of Europe, as countless individuals sought refuge from the growing threat of fascism. Oppenheimer's heritage as the son of Jewish immigrants, combined with his growing awareness of the Nazi policies, made these developments feel intensely personal. He felt a sense of responsibility, not only as a scientist but as a human being, to support those fleeing persecution. Although Oppenheimer was not an observant Jew, the increasing threats against Jewish people in Europe pushed him to act. He began quietly contributing a portion of his income to support Jewish refugees, a modest yet significant gesture of solidarity. This act of giving marked the beginning of Robert's deeper involvement in political and humanitarian causes, an involvement that would later attract both praise and scrutiny. Unlike many of his colleagues who avoided political engagement, Robert embraced the idea that science and ethics were intertwined, a belief that would shape his decisions and actions in the years to come. Oppenheimer's political interests expanded beyond the Jewish plight in Europe. He was deeply troubled by the Spanish Civil War, a conflict that erupted in 1936 between the Republicans, who represented a coalition of left-wing and democratic forces, and the nationalists, led by General Francisco Franco, who received military support from Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. The Spanish Civil War became a symbol of the broader struggle between fascism and democracy, and many intellectuals and artists around the world, including George Orwell, Ernest Hemingway, and Pablo Picasso, voiced their support for the Republican cause. Robert was among those who felt compelled to support the Spanish Republicans. Although he did not publicly endorse any specific political ideology, he privately contributed funds to organizations that supported the Republican side. For Oppenheimer, the Spanish Civil War was more than just a distant conflict. It was a tangible reminder of the moral and ethical dilemmas facing the world. He believed that the fight against fascism was a universal cause, one that transcended national borders and demanded action from all who valued human rights and freedom. This stance reflected Oppenheimer's evolving understanding of his role as a scientist in society, a role that went beyond the confines of the laboratory. Oppenheimer's political engagement during this period led him to interact with individuals and groups that held left-leaning or progressive ideologies. He developed friendships with several individuals who were openly affiliated with the Communist Party of the United States, a group that, at the time, advocated for workers' rights, social justice, and anti-fascist efforts. His brother Frank Oppenheimer, who shared Robert's concern for social causes, also became involved with leftist circles, eventually joining the Communist Party. Although Robert himself never officially joined the Communist Party, His associations with individuals who did would later cast a shadow over his career, especially in the politically charged atmosphere of post-war America. In the late 1930s, Oppenheimer's political interests intersected with his academic life in California. Berkeley, where he spent much of his time, was a hub for progressive ideas, and many students and faculty members were actively involved in labor rights and social reform movements. This vibrant intellectual community inspired Robert to explore social and economic issues in greater depth. He read extensively on subjects like Marxism, socialism, and political philosophy, seeking to understand the underlying forces that shaped society. For Oppenheimer, these explorations were not mere academic exercises. They were part of his broader quest to reconcile his scientific pursuits with his ethical convictions. Oppenheimer's increased engagement with political and social issues led him to question the role of science in society. He began to see science not only as a tool for understanding the natural world, but also as a potential force for social change. This idea was radical for the time, especially in a country where scientists were expected to remain apolitical. But Oppenheimer believed that scientists had a responsibility to consider the ethical implications of their work, a belief that would later place him at the center of one of the most profound moral dilemmas of the 20th century. By the end of the 1930s, Oppenheimer had become a respected figure in the physics community, known not only for his academic contributions, but also for his political awareness. He was part of a growing movement of scientists who recognized that the discoveries of modern physics could have far-reaching consequences for humanity. This recognition was underscored by the growing interest in nuclear research and the realization that nuclear energy could potentially be harnessed as a weapon. The world was on the brink of a new era, and Oppenheimer was one of the few scientists who fully grasped the gravity of this transition. Amid this politically charged atmosphere, Robert met a young woman named Jean Tatlock, a psychiatrist and a dedicated member of the Communist Party. Jean was 10 years younger than Robert, passionate, intelligent, and deeply committed to social causes. Their relationship was intense but complicated, marked by both intellectual connection and emotional turmoil. Jean's influence further deepened Robert's interest in social justice and leftist ideologies. However, her involvement with the Communist Party would later complicate Oppenheimer's own life, drawing him into a web of political suspicion and intrigue during the height of the Cold War. Although their relationship was ultimately short-lived, Jean Tatlock's impact on Robert's life was profound. She introduced him to literature and poetry, including the works of John Donne and the Bhagavad Gita, which would later become sources of solace and reflection for him. Jean's tragic death in 1944 left Robert with a lingering sense of loss, a reminder of the personal sacrifices that often accompanied his professional life. In many ways, Jean embodied the idealistic, socially conscious side of Robert, a side that he struggled to reconcile with his role as a scientist and leader in the pursuit of scientific advancement. As the 1930s drew to a close, the political landscape grew darker. In September 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, triggering the beginning of World War II. The United States, still reeling from the Great Depression, remained officially neutral, but the conflict in Europe weighed heavily on the minds of American intellectuals, scientists, and policymakers. The possibility of Nazi Germany developing advanced weaponry, particularly nuclear weapons, became a matter of grave concern. Many scientists, including Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, recognized the potential danger and began urging the U.S. government to consider research into atomic energy and nuclear fission. Although Oppenheimer was not initially involved in nuclear research, his reputation and expertise in physics brought him to the attention of government officials. In 1941, he was approached by the U.S. government to participate in a top-secret project aimed at exploring the feasibility of developing an atomic bomb. This project, which would later become known as the Manhattan Project, marked the beginning of a new chapter in Robert's life, one that would test his scientific abilities, his ethical convictions, and his very sense of identity. Robert's political awakening in the 1930s had prepared him, in some ways, for the challenges that lay ahead. He had come to understand that science could not be divorced from ethics, that the pursuit of knowledge was inextricably linked to the moral responsibility of its use. As he agreed to join the Manhattan Project, Robert was acutely aware of the weight of his decision. He knew that the work he was about to undertake would have consequences far beyond the laboratory, consequences that could alter the course of history, and yet, like so many scientists of his time, he felt a duty to contribute to the defense of his country and to prevent the rise of a fascist empire. Thus, with a mix of conviction, fear, and uncertainty, Robert Oppenheimer stepped into his role as one of the leading figures in the Manhattan Project. The political and ethical questions he had grappled with in the 1930s would now come to the forefront as he embarked on a journey that would forever change the world and his own life. In late 1941, just as the United States was on the brink of entering World War II, Robert Oppenheimer was called upon to lead a project that would test his scientific expertise and moral resolve to their limits. The project, known as the Manhattan Project, was a top-secret effort to develop an atomic bomb, a weapon of unprecedented power. The urgency of this mission stemmed from the fear that Nazi Germany, with its advanced scientific community, might succeed in building such a weapon first. For Oppenheimer, the stakes were clear. If the Nazis acquired an atomic bomb, they could gain an unstoppable advantage, threatening democracy and freedom across the world. The Manhattan Project required not only the brightest scientific minds, but also a leader who could bring together scientists from diverse backgrounds and disciplines. Major General Leslie Groves, the military head of the project, initially had reservations about selecting Oppenheimer for the role of scientific director. Groves was looking for someone with a Nobel Prize, someone who would have the gravitas to lead a team of the world's most accomplished scientists. However, after meeting with Oppenheimer and assessing his intellect, charisma, and organizational skills, Groves recognized that Robert was uniquely suited for the job. Oppenheimer's first task as the scientific director was to establish a secure, remote location for the research and development of the atomic bomb. After scouting various sites, he chose a remote plateau in Los Alamos, New Mexico, a region that was both geographically isolated and spacious enough to accommodate the large-scale experimentation required for the project. Los Alamos became the headquarters of the Manhattan Project, a place where scientific minds from around the world would converge to solve one of the greatest technical challenges of the 20th century. Under Oppenheimer's leadership, Los Alamos quickly transformed from a remote outpost into a bustling scientific community. The facility was staffed with some of the finest minds in physics, engineering, and chemistry, many of whom were drawn by the project's high-stakes nature and the opportunity to contribute to a war effort they believed was both necessary and just. Oppenheimer assembled a team that included figures like Enrico Fermi, Hans Bethe, and Edward Teller, each of whom brought unique expertise to the project. Together they worked tirelessly, often late into the night, driven by a sense of urgency and an understanding of the profound consequences of their work. Oppenheimer's leadership style at Los Alamos was intense and deeply involved. He was known for his quick grasp of complex scientific problems and his ability to inspire those around him. Rather than directing from a distance, Robert was present at nearly every major discussion and decision, engaging with his team on both scientific and philosophical levels. His vision for the project went beyond technical success. He wanted his team to understand the gravity of their work and the moral responsibility that came with it. This approach created a sense of camaraderie and purpose, as scientists from various backgrounds united in pursuit of a common goal. Despite his inspiring leadership, Oppenheimer was not immune to the emotional toll of the project. He knew that the weapon they were developing could cause unprecedented destruction. Privately, he struggled with the ethical implications of the atomic bomb, even as he pushed forward with its development. He was haunted by the thought that the bomb might one day be used against civilian populations, a possibility that weighed heavily on his conscience. Yet he justified his involvement by the belief that the bomb's existence would ultimately serve as a deterrent, preventing future conflicts by demonstrating the horrific power of nuclear technology. The challenges at Los Alamos were immense. The project faced numerous technical obstacles, from the difficulty of enriching uranium and producing plutonium to the complex engineering required to create a functional weapon. 2 different designs were pursued: a gun-type fission weapon using uranium, which would later be known as Little Boy, and an implosion-type weapon using plutonium, known as Fat Man. Each design presented its own set of challenges, and Oppenheimer's team worked under intense pressure to solve these problems before the Nazis could develop their own bomb. As the project progressed, Oppenheimer's health began to deteriorate. The stress of his role, combined with his relentless work schedule and chain-smoking habit, took a toll on his physical well-being. He lost weight, becoming gaunt and hollow-cheeked, and colleagues noted that he often looked exhausted. Yet despite these physical strains, he remained focused, driven by an unshakable sense of duty to see the project through to completion. His determination inspired his team, even as they grappled with the knowledge that their work could change the world in ways they could not yet fully comprehend. By the summer of 1945, the Manhattan Project was nearing its final phase. The culmination of years of research, sacrifice, and ethical struggle was about to be tested in a remote area of the New Mexico desert. This test, known as the Trinity Test, would reveal whether Oppenheimer and his team had succeeded in creating the world's first atomic bomb. The stakes were unimaginably high, and as the day of the test approached, a mixture of excitement, fear, and anticipation gripped the scientists at Los Alamos. By July 1945, after years of relentless work and scientific breakthroughs, the Manhattan Project reached its critical juncture. The scientists and military personnel at Los Alamos had prepared for what would become the first-ever test of an atomic bomb, codenamed the Trinity Test. This test was to take place in the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico, a remote and barren landscape far removed from populated areas, a place deemed ideal for containing the unprecedented power of a nuclear detonation. Anticipation ran high as the test date approached. For the scientists, the Trinity Test was the culmination of years of theoretical calculations, experimentation, and tireless work. Oppenheimer himself was a mix of excitement and anxiety. He understood, perhaps better than anyone else, the enormity of what they were about to unleash. The bomb was not just a technological achievement, it was a potential turning point for humanity. Standing on the brink of this moment, he reportedly felt a sense of dread that mingled with his scientific curiosity, a feeling that would haunt him long after the test was over. In the early hours of July 16, 1945, the test preparations were complete. A device dubbed the Gadget, an implosion-type plutonium bomb similar to the Fat Man design later used over Nagasaki, was assembled and ready for detonation. The scientists and military observers had taken positions several miles away from the test site, each equipped with goggles to protect against the bomb's intense ultraviolet light. Oppenheimer, alongside fellow physicists like Enrico Fermi, Edward Teller, and Hans Bethe, watched as the final countdown began. At precisely 5:29 a.m., the bomb detonated, and in an instant, the quiet desert was transformed into a scene of unimaginable destruction. A blinding flash illuminated the sky, followed by an intense wave of heat that washed over the observers even from their distant vantage points. The explosion was more powerful than many had anticipated, with a fireball that quickly expanded into a massive mushroom cloud, reaching an altitude of over 7 miles. The shockwave rippled through the ground, and those present described feeling as though they had witnessed the birth of something both awe-inspiring and terrifying. In that moment, Oppenheimer reportedly recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita, the ancient Hindu scripture he had studied deeply. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the Mighty One. Although he later reflected that another line, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," would have been more fitting. The first thought that ran through his mind was one of profound, almost religious awe. For Oppenheimer, the Trinity Test was not merely a scientific triumph. It was a revelation of the destructive potential that lay within human hands. The test had succeeded beyond their expectations, but it had also marked the beginning of a moral burden that Oppenheimer would carry for the rest of his life. In the immediate aftermath of the test, there was a sense of exhilaration at Los Alamos. The bomb had worked. The scientists had succeeded in creating a weapon of unparalleled power. But even amid the celebration, there were questions that lingered in the minds of many. What would this new power mean for humanity? Would it bring peace, or would it herald an age of unprecedented destruction? For Oppenheimer, these questions were not hypothetical. They were personal, ethical challenges that he would grapple with in the coming months and years. Just a few weeks after the Trinity test, the bomb would be put to its intended use. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The bomb exploded with a force equivalent to approximately 15,000 tons of TNT, flattening much of the city and killing tens of thousands of people instantly. In the days that followed, the devastation became clear as reports of radiation sickness and lingering injuries began to emerge. Hiroshima had been transformed from a bustling city to a scene of horror, and the images that filtered back to the United States left a deep and lasting impact on the American public. 3 days after Hiroshima, on August 9, 1945, the United States dropped a second bomb, Fat Man, on the city of Nagasaki. This bomb, an implosion-type design similar to the one tested at Trinity, exploded with a force of 21,000 tons of TNT, causing yet more widespread destruction and loss of life. Within days, Japan surrendered, bringing an end to World War II. But the price of this victory was steep, and the moral implications of the bombings weighed heavily on those who had been involved in the Manhattan Project, none more so than Oppenheimer. When Oppenheimer learned of the bombings, his initial reaction was reportedly one of grim satisfaction. He had dedicated years of his life to this project, and it had achieved its objective of ending the war. However, this feeling quickly gave way to horror and guilt. As he reflected on the human cost of the bombings, the scale of destruction and loss weighed on him profoundly. He later admitted to feeling an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the lives lost in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a burden that would haunt him for the remainder of his days. Back at Los Alamos, the mood was somber. While the bomb's success had been celebrated initially, the reality of its impact soon settled over the scientists and staff. Oppenheimer himself was visibly shaken, and his demeanor changed in the days following the bombings. He became quieter, more introspective, and those who knew him could see the toll the project had taken on his spirit. The atomic bomb had brought an end to the war, but it had also changed the world, and Oppenheimer knew that he would forever be linked to this moment of unprecedented destruction. In a meeting with President Harry Truman just weeks after the bombings, Oppenheimer expressed his feelings of guilt, telling the president, "I feel I have blood on my hands." This statement reportedly angered Truman, who saw the bomb as a necessary tool to end the war and save American lives. But for Oppenheimer, the bomb represented something far more complex, a symbol of both human ingenuity and human fallibility. His experience with the Manhattan Project had forced him to confront the darker side of scientific discovery, and he was left with a profound sense of unease about the legacy he had helped to create. Following the bombings, Oppenheimer's views on nuclear weapons began to shift. He became a vocal advocate for international control over atomic energy, believing that the power of the bomb was too great to be held by any single nation. He argued that the United States had a moral responsibility to lead the way in preventing further use of nuclear weapons, urging for transparency and cooperation with other countries. However, his calls for disarmament and regulation were met with resistance, particularly as the Cold War began to take shape and tensions with the Soviet Union escalated. Oppenheimer's moral conflict became a central theme of his life in the post-war years. He had achieved what few scientists could ever dream of, a position of unparalleled influence in both science and government. Yet he felt that this influence came at a cost. The atomic bomb, which had been born from his scientific endeavors, now represented a threat to humanity itself. Oppenheimer's experience with the bomb was a reminder of the ethical responsibilities that come with scientific discovery, and he would spend the rest of his life grappling with the consequences of his work. As the dust settled after World War II, Robert Oppenheimer found himself at the center of a new political and ideological battle. The Cold War had begun to take shape, with the United States and the Soviet Union locked in a tense standoff that would define global politics for decades to come. Oppenheimer's role as the father of the atomic bomb made him a prominent figure in this new era, and he was called upon to help shape U.S. nuclear policy. However, his increasingly vocal opposition to further nuclear arms development put him at odds with powerful figures in both the government and military, and his past associations with left-leaning individuals would soon come back to haunt him. In 1947, Oppenheimer was appointed as the chairman of the General Advisory Committee, GAC, of the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, an organization tasked with overseeing the United States' nuclear weapons program. This position placed him in a unique role, allowing him to influence nuclear policy at the highest levels. His role with the GAC marked a new chapter in his career, one in which he would advocate for nuclear responsibility and ethical considerations in military strategy. However, his views on nuclear policy, particularly his opposition to the development of a hydrogen bomb, would ultimately lead to his downfall. Oppenheimer's opposition to the hydrogen bomb was rooted in his belief that such a weapon would only increase the risk of global annihilation. He argued that the hydrogen bomb, which was far more powerful than the atomic bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, had no practical military use and would only serve to escalate tensions with the Soviet Union. This stance placed him in direct conflict with Edward Teller, a former colleague and fellow physicist who was a staunch advocate for the development of thermonuclear weapons. Teller, who saw the hydrogen bomb as essential to maintaining U.S. superiority, became a vocal critic of Oppenheimer's opposition. The debate over the hydrogen bomb came to a head in 1949, when the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb, ending the U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons. The test sent shockwaves through the American government, sparking fears that the Soviet Union was quickly catching up in the nuclear arms race. In response, President Harry Truman ordered the development of a hydrogen bomb, despite Oppenheimer's objections. Oppenheimer's stance made him a target of suspicion, with some government officials questioning his loyalty and commitment to national security. These suspicions were fueled by Oppenheimer's political associations in the 1930s, particularly his relationships with individuals who had been affiliated with the Communist Party. Although Oppenheimer had never been a member of the Communist Party, his friendships with prominent leftists, including his brother Frank and his former lover Jean Tatlock, were enough to raise concerns during the height of the Red Scare. The FBI had kept a file on Oppenheimer since the 1940s, and as Cold War paranoia intensified, this file became a tool for those who sought to discredit him. In 1954, Oppenheimer's security clearance was called into question, leading to a closed-door hearing that would determine his future in government. The hearing, which became a highly publicized event, exposed Oppenheimer's past political associations and scrutinized his loyalty to the United States. Edward Teller, who had once worked alongside Oppenheimer at Los Alamos, testified against him, expressing doubts about his reliability in matters of national security. This betrayal by a former colleague dealt a severe blow to Oppenheimer's reputation and credibility. The 1954 security hearing marked a turning point in Robert Oppenheimer's life. After days of intense scrutiny, the panel decided to revoke his security clearance, effectively ending his direct involvement with U.S. nuclear policy. This decision was not only a personal blow to Oppenheimer, but also a significant public humiliation. Overnight, He went from being one of the most respected scientific minds in the country to a figure shrouded in suspicion and controversy. For Oppenheimer, who had dedicated years of his life to serving his country through the Manhattan Project and his work on the Atomic Energy Commission, this betrayal by his government felt deeply unjust. The hearing's impact went beyond the immediate loss of his security clearance. It sent a chilling message to the scientific community and intensified the atmosphere of paranoia that characterized the Red Scare era. Many scientists viewed the hearing as a political attack on Oppenheimer, orchestrated by those who feared his influence and opposed his stance on nuclear disarmament. In the aftermath of the hearing, prominent figures within the scientific community rallied to support Oppenheimer, arguing that his treatment was emblematic of the dangers of McCarthyism. However, despite their efforts, the damage had been done. Oppenheimer's reputation had been tarnished, and his once brilliant career was now overshadowed by controversy. Although he was no longer a central figure in government, Oppenheimer remained intellectually active, turning his attention to teaching, writing, and public advocacy. He continued his role as director of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, where he encouraged the next generation of scientists and scholars to think critically about their work's ethical and philosophical implications. Oppenheimer's experiences had made him acutely aware of the responsibilities that came with scientific discovery, and he sought to impart this understanding to his students. Many who studied under him during this period noted his contemplative, almost melancholic demeanor, as if he were haunted by the weight of his own achievements. Oppenheimer's introspective nature deepened in these years, and he began to explore the philosophical and moral dimensions of his life's work more openly. He had long been interested in Eastern philosophy, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism, which offered a different perspective on life, death, and the nature of existence. His fascination with the Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu text, had intensified after the Trinity Test, and he often returned to its teachings as a source of solace and reflection. Oppenheimer found in Eastern philosophy a framework for understanding the contradictions he faced, a way to reconcile his role as a creator of destructive power with his desire for peace. In 1959, Oppenheimer gave a lecture at a conference in Geneva, where he spoke candidly about the moral dilemmas associated with scientific progress. He argued that scientists could no longer afford to be apolitical, that they had a duty to consider the broader implications of their work. His words struck a chord with the audience, many of whom were grappling with the same questions in the wake of the atomic age. Oppenheimer's speech reflected a profound shift in his perspective. He was no longer simply a physicist or a researcher, but a thinker concerned with the ethical dimensions of knowledge and the impact of science on society. In these later years, Oppenheimer's isolation from government work allowed him to reconnect with some of the principles that had first drawn him to science, a sense of wonder, curiosity, and a desire to understand the universe. Freed from the immediate pressures of military research, he returned to his early interests in quantum mechanics, publishing a few papers and contributing to academic discussions. However, his contributions were limited by the fallout from the security hearing, which continued to cast a shadow over his career. Many of his colleagues respected him deeply, yet the scars of the Red Scare lingered, shaping how history would remember him. By the early 1960s, public sentiment had begun to shift. The Red Scare was fading, and the excesses of McCarthyism were increasingly viewed as a dark chapter in American history. The scientific community, along with many members of the public, began to recognize the injustice of Oppenheimer's treatment. This change in perspective was partly due to the efforts of scientists, academics, and policymakers who continued to advocate for Oppenheimer's rehabilitation. There was a growing understanding that his security hearing had been a political maneuver, one that sacrificed a brilliant scientist's reputation for the sake of Cold War paranoia. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy's administration took a significant step toward restoring Oppenheimer's legacy by awarding him the prestigious Enrico Fermi Award, one of the highest honors for scientific achievement. This award, named after the physicist who had worked alongside Oppenheimer on the first nuclear reactor, was a symbolic acknowledgement of Oppenheimer's contributions to science and his dedication to his country. Tragically, Kennedy was assassinated before he could present the award, but his successor, President Lyndon B. Johnson, formally honored Oppenheimer. For Oppenheimer, the award was bittersweet, a recognition that could never fully erase the scars of the past, but served as a gesture of redemption. Accepting the Fermi Award was a deeply emotional experience for Oppenheimer. In his acceptance speech, he spoke with humility, reflecting on the challenges and responsibilities that scientists faced in the atomic age. He acknowledged the complexity of his work, expressing a mixture of pride and regret for the role he had played in shaping the modern world. His words carried a tone of quiet resignation, a sense that he had come to terms with his legacy, even if it was a legacy burdened by both achievements and moral ambiguities. For those who knew Oppenheimer, this speech captured the essence of the man, a brilliant, conflicted, and deeply reflective individual who had changed history, but was haunted by the cost of that change. Despite this formal rehabilitation, Oppenheimer's health had begun to decline. Years of relentless work and chain smoking had taken a toll on his body, and in late 1965, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. This diagnosis marked the beginning of a painful final chapter in his life. True to his character, Oppenheimer faced his illness with stoic resolve, refusing to let his suffering define his final days. As his condition worsened, he spent increasing amounts of time at his beachside retreat in the Virgin Islands, surrounded by family and close friends. Here, in the quiet solitude of nature, he found a measure of peace, reflecting on the journey that had brought him from the bustling streets of New York to the deserts of New Mexico and beyond. On February 18, 1967, Robert Oppenheimer passed away at the age of 62. His death marked the end of a life that had been as extraordinary as it was tumultuous. He was survived by his wife Kitty, his son Peter, and his daughter Catherine. His passing was mourned by colleagues, students, and admirers who recognized that the world had lost one of its most brilliant and complex minds. The scientific community remembered him not only as a pioneer in theoretical physics, but also as a man who had wrestled with the profound moral questions that his discoveries had raised. After his death, Oppenheimer's ashes were scattered in the waters off the Virgin Islands, a fitting final resting place for a man who had sought to understand the mysteries of the universe. In the years that followed, his legacy would be debated, analyzed, and reinterpreted by historians, scientists, and the public. Some viewed him as a tragic figure, a man whose intellect had propelled him to the forefront of science but whose moral conscience had left him conflicted and isolated. Others saw him as a symbol of the scientific age, a reminder of the dual-edged nature of knowledge and the responsibilities that come with it. Today, Robert Oppenheimer is remembered as one of the most influential scientists of the 20th century, a man whose work reshaped the world, but who struggled with the consequences of his own achievements. His contributions to physics, from the Born-Oppenheimer approximation to his leadership of the Manhattan Project, were monumental. Yet, it was his moral and ethical reflections that have perhaps left the most lasting impact. Oppenheimer's life serves as a reminder that science is not simply a pursuit of knowledge, but a journey filled with ethical choices, each carrying the potential to shape humanity's future. Oppenheimer's legacy is a complex one, woven with threads of brilliance, ambition, and doubt. His story poses questions that remain relevant today. What is the role of scientists in society? How should they navigate the ethical dilemmas that arise from their work? And what responsibilities do they bear when their discoveries hold the power to change the world? For Oppenheimer, these questions were not abstract. They were the core of his life's journey, a journey that took him from the wonders of quantum mechanics to the deserts of New Mexico, where he helped unlock the secrets of the atom. In the decades since his death, Oppenheimer's legacy has continued to evolve. He is often depicted as a tragic hero, a man of extraordinary intellect who, despite his achievements, was haunted by the moral implications of his work. His story has inspired countless books, films, and academic studies, each seeking to understand the complexities of a man who embodied both the promise and peril of scientific discovery. Today, scientists and thinkers look to Oppenheimer's life as a case study in the ethical responsibilities that accompany knowledge, especially as we grapple with new technologies that hold both promise and danger. Oppenheimer's legacy lives on in the countless scientists he inspired, the students he taught, and the ethical debates he helped spark. His life serves as a powerful reminder of the human dimension of science, a reminder that behind every discovery is a person, with hopes, fears, and a sense of responsibility to humanity. As we continue to explore the frontiers of science, Oppenheimer's journey offers valuable lessons on the need for humility, ethical reflection, and an unwavering commitment to the welfare of all. In the end, Robert Oppenheimer's story is one of contrasts, of brilliance tempered by doubt, of ambition shadowed by guilt, of knowledge balanced by conscience. He was a man who sought to unlock the mysteries of the universe, only to find himself wrestling with the consequences of his discoveries. His life reminds us that science, for all its wonders, is a human endeavor, one that requires us to confront not only the outer reaches of the cosmos, but the inner depths of our own humanity. And so, as we remember Robert Oppenheimer, we are called to reflect on the power of science and the responsibilities it entails, a legacy that is as relevant today as it was in his time. For Oppenheimer, the journey of discovery was both exhilarating and sobering, a journey that forever changed him and the world. And as we look to the future, his story stands as a testament to the enduring need for ethical science, for wisdom tempered by compassion, and for a commitment to use knowledge in the service of humanity. And that brings us to the close of Robert Oppenheimer's complex, remarkable journey, a life that transcended science, touching on the very heart of human responsibility. Oppenheimer was a man whose genius brought him to the forefront of history, but whose conscience would not let him rest easily with the power he had helped to unleash. From his early days as a precocious scholar, to his leading role in the Manhattan Project, and through his later years wrestling with the ethical implications of his work, Oppenheimer's story serves as a powerful reminder. Scientific discovery is never in isolation. It shapes and is shaped by the world we live in, and it demands reflection, courage, and a commitment to humanity. In an era still touched by the questions Oppenheimer faced, his legacy endures as a call to future scientists, thinkers, and leaders. It reminds us to ask not only, what can we achieve, but also, what should we strive to achieve and at what cost? Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Robert Oppenheimer. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any future deep dives into the lives and legacies of history's most intriguing figures. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the boundaries of knowledge and ethics, here with us at Bio Bytes.